They gave my sister a $240,000 trust fund and left an empty chair for me, but they never imagined I'd turn that chair into an empire. I noticed it the moment I walked into the reception hall. Something felt off. The chandelier lights spilled across the pristine white tablecloths like liquid diamonds, reflecting off the rose arrangements I had chosen myself. Pale pink blooms mixed with sprays of baby's breath, just as I'd planned. The crystal glassware caught the light, scattering tiny rainbows across the marble walls. Everything looked perfect, every single detail exactly as I had envisioned for my sister Sophia's wedding day. Except for one thing, the family table. I froze, my heels clicking against the marble floor, the sound echoing like a question I didn't want to answer. My eyes traced the long table draped in white linen and trimmed with gold-rimmed plates. I counted quietly: 1, 2, 3 chairs. 3. Not 4. Mom, Dad, Sophia, no chair for me. The clipboard I'd been holding suddenly felt heavy in my arms, like a shield I wasn't sure I could hide behind. A waiter brushed past me, muttering a polite apology, but I barely heard him. The whole room kept buzzing with pre-reception chatter, laughter, camera flashes, but for me, time had stopped at that empty space. When my mother turned, champagne glass glinting under the light, she caught my eye. The small practiced smile she gave me didn't reach her eyes. "Ainsley," she said, my name rolling off her tongue like an afterthought. "Is everything ready for Sophia's entrance?" I gestured toward the table. "There are only 3 chairs." Her gaze flicked briefly toward the seating arrangement, then back to me, cool, unbothered, detached. "Yes. You don't need one." It landed like a physical hit. I felt my shoulders tighten, my spine straighten, the same way I'd been doing since I was a kid whenever I needed to hide the hurt. "I see," I said quietly. My voice was steadier than I felt. Sophia appeared then, radiant in the wedding gown I'd helped her pick out months ago, ivory lace over champagne satin, flattering her olive complexion perfectly. I repeated it once more, because I needed to hear the confirmation from her lips. "The head count's wrong at the family table." Sophia's brows furrowed slightly, that familiar little crease forming between them. "Maybe the staff made a mistake," she said, her tone soft but laced with that same arrogance I'd grown used to. "Someone must have miscounted." I held her gaze a second too long. Then I smiled. "I understand." The words burned on my tongue, but my face stayed calm. I turned, clipboard in hand, posture perfect. Every step I took felt deliberate, controlled. That's the thing about years of quiet rejection, you learn how to walk like it doesn't hurt. I found a quiet corner near the service entrance, opened my clipboard, and flipped through the pages I already knew by heart. My hands trembled slightly anyway. Just last night, I'd been in this very hall until 3 a.m., supervising lighting setups, approving floral placements, double-checking menus. While my family slept in their hotel suites, I had crawled through every inch of this venue to make sure Sophia's big day was flawless. My phone buzzed on the counter beside me. A message from the florist. "We're continuing because we trust you, Miss Lopez. Sophia hasn't paid us yet." I closed my eyes. I remembered quietly transferring $4,200 from my own savings last week to cover the deposit when Sophia's card had been declined. Another silent contribution. Another piece of me stitched into her perfect day. I caught my reflection in a decorative mirror navy dress, clean lines, a simple design I had sewn myself. Hair swept neatly into a bun, makeup perfect. Nothing about me looked broken, but that hollow feeling in my chest said otherwise. 3 chairs, not 4. A group of guests passed nearby, whispering. I pretended not to hear. Years of practice. "Ainsley, this wedding is incredible." The voice pulled me out of my thoughts. Melissa Banks, my childhood friend, stood beside me, smiling warmly. "Thank you," I replied, forcing a small laugh. "Just doing my job." "Your job?" she repeated. "You planned all this? I thought you were just helping with the dress." I shook my head. "No. I coordinated everything. Venue, flowers, menu, music. All of it." "That's incredible," she said, then lowered her voice. "Though, I'm surprised you're not sitting with your family." Before I could answer, another memory hit me. Last night. Rehearsal dinner, Mom's arm around Sophia as she introduced her to distant relatives. "This is my precious daughter, the one who'll inherit everything." What is not now? What is not now? Not now for. When Uncle Robert had asked about me, she'd laughed softly. "Oh, Ainsley's busy with work. She's not really part of the family celebrations. Not really part of the family." Those words replayed in my head like a song I couldn't stop hearing. An hour later, I sat alone in a quiet alcove near the catering room, my laptop balanced on my knees, my finger hovering over the send button of an email I'd drafted 7 days earlier, a formal payment warning addressed to my parents' business accounts. Professional, polite, ignored. Family loyalty versus professional integrity. That had been the story of my life. I stared at the screen, then at the family table across the hall. 3 chairs. Not 4. Enough. 15 minutes later, I was sitting in a corner booth at Cafe Roma across the street, my laptop open, half a cold espresso beside me. I pulled up the family financial records I'd been quietly tracking for years, ever since I'd taken over managing their events and finances unofficially. The screen glowed in the dim light. Mortgage statements. Credit card bills. Trust fund accounts. My stomach twisted. The family home outside Columbus, the big brick colonial, my parents bragged about costing $1.2 million, had not one but 2 mortgages. The second one was taken out just 6 months ago, almost matching the first. Then the credit cards, 3 of them, 4 months overdue, minimum payments ignored. Every statement bore Sophia's name, and my mother's signature. I scrolled down to the Lopez Educational Trust, my grandmother's legacy, set up for both Sophia and me. Balance. $3,421. Last year, $240,000. My fingers froze on the keyboard. 8 months of educational expense withdrawals, each corresponding perfectly with Sophia's Instagram posts. Aspen ski vacation. Bermuda holiday. Mediterranean cruise. Educational, indeed. My phone buzzed again. The florist. Miss Lopez. We need payment confirmation by 4 p.m. The final $12,600 remains unpaid. Sophia hasn't answered. A second text followed from the caterer. Urgent. Card declined. Please advise. Then another from the lighting team. Proceed with reception lighting? No payment received. My jaw tightened. I remembered every Christmas where Sophia got designer gifts and I got gift cards. Every summer she spent abroad while I worked double shifts to afford tuition. When college acceptance letters arrived, Sophia's came with a fully furnished apartment and my parents' full support. Mine came with a stack of loan forms. We believe in you, Ainsley, Dad had said. You're the responsible one. You'll manage just fine. I did. I took out $40,000 in loans at 18, still paying them off today. My phone vibrated again. Messages from colleagues and vendors began flooding in, people I'd worked with for years. Marco, the hotel manager. Janine, the photographer. The DJ. The florist. All asking if I was okay. Not Sophia the bride, but me. They'd noticed. They'd seen. 3 days ago, I had overheard my mother on the phone in this same hall. Prepare 3 seats only, she'd said. Ainsley doesn't count as family. She's just the help. Those words had pierced me, but I'd swallowed the pain and kept working. Now I opened Instagram. Sophia's latest post filled my screen. So blessed to have the perfect family supporting my perfect day. I planned every detail myself. My own handwriting was visible on the table cards in the picture. That was it. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, this ends today. With calm, deliberate movements, I opened my professional files. I signed the digital document I'd prepared a week ago, a formal notice of contract termination for non-payment. My company logo sat proudly at the top. Family respects family. I whispered to the empty cafe. This isn't respect. I hit send. Then one by one, I forwarded the notice to every vendor still awaiting payment. Each click felt lighter. Each message felt like another chain snapping off my back. For once, I wasn't covering for them. I wasn't the quiet fixer. I was the professional they had taken for granted. I closed my laptop, silenced my phone, and took a sip of my now cold espresso. It tasted like freedom. 10 minutes later, I was back at the venue. I spotted Sophia first, her veil catching the light, panic written across her perfect face as she wove between tables. Her eyes locked on mine. Ainsley, what's going on? The bar just closed. The manager's asking for payment. Fix this. I set my laptop down. I gave you 7 days, I said evenly. You ignored every warning. I've withdrawn my company's account guarantee. The hotel needs full payment now. What? She gasped. You can't just... I can. And I did. Behind her, the reception was already unraveling. The string quartet stopped mid-song. Waiters collected half-filled glasses. The hotel manager spoke quietly with my mother, who stood fuming, card in hand. When her credit card was declined, her face went pale. For the first time in my life, I saw her look small, and that was only the beginning. The chaos unfolded like a slow-motion disaster, the kind where everyone pretends to stay calm, even as the floor caves in beneath them. Sophia's perfect wedding, the one I had designed down to the color of the napkin ribbons, was crumbling in real time. Guests whispered, waiters hesitated, and a quiet confusion rippled through the hall like a spreading stain. At the center of it all stood my mother, Vivian Lopez, her champagne flute trembling slightly as she demanded explanations from the hotel manager. My father hovered beside her, already trying one card after another, his polished charm replaced by something unfamiliar: panic. For once, the Lopez family's practiced grace had failed them. I took a breath, Then another, steady and measured. This was no longer my burden to carry. The hotel manager caught sight of me and immediately straightened his tie. "Miss Lopez, thank you for coming," he said, his tone respectful, cautious. "I have the contracts ready, as you requested." Beside him, my mother's head snapped toward me. "What is he talking about?" she hissed. "We hired your company. You work for us." I didn't flinch. "Actually," the manager said, his voice politely neutral. "Miss Lopez's firm is one of our most valued partners. Her company's master account guarantee was the only reason we proceeded without full payment up front." The words landed like a bomb. Heads turned, conversations stopped. In that instant, the room's energy shifted. The staff who had been catering to my mother and sister moments ago now looked to me for instruction. Glasses of water appeared at my elbow. Someone pulled out a chair for me. I didn't sit. Power has a strange weight when it finally lands in your hands, especially after a lifetime of being told you had none. Sophia rushed toward me, her veil catching on a chair leg. She grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my skin. "Please don't do this," she whispered. "You'll ruin everything. Just this one day, my wedding day." The jacket into Lycan works. Now gam. For a fleeting second, I saw not the entitled bride, but the little sister who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. The one who once believed I could fix anything, but that memory faded fast. My mother's heels clicked across the marble as she approached. Her face carried that same rehearsed confidence she'd worn at every gala, every fundraiser, every family dinner where appearances mattered more than truth. "She won't dare," she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "Ainsley has always been a shadow in this family. She knows her place." There it was, the sentence that had defined decades of my life. A shadow. Something inside me went still. Not broken, not angry, just done. The clipboard I'd clutched since morning no longer felt like a shield. It was something else now, a declaration. I turned to the manager and took the pen from his hand. The paper he held trembled slightly as I signed my name on the service suspension document, clear, looping letters that spelled out everything I had become. Professional, capable, enough. I looked up, meeting my mother's eyes. "I gave you 7 days to pay," I said, my voice calm, clear. "You ignored me. I'm simply enforcing the contract." Gasps rippled through the crowd. My father stepped forward, pale and sweating. "Ainsley, please. We can talk about this privately." I raised an eyebrow. "Like you discussed removing my chair from the family table?" The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. Then, slowly, I opened my professional folder and pulled out the documents I'd discovered days ago. "Or maybe," I continued, "we should talk about how Sophia drained the trust fund meant for both of us." The crowd stirred a collective intake of breath. Sophia's new husband, Mark, turned to her. Confusion turning into shock. "What is she talking about?" "What?" I didn't look away. "That money was supposed to pay for our education, both of ours. $240,000. Now it's gone. Every penny. To cover your vacations, your wedding, your designer, everything. We want to do honor hand of Marque. We want to do they were side, with Marque table." "You have no proof," my mother snapped, her voice rising. I handed the papers to the hotel manager. "Bank statements, transfer records, authorizations signed by both of you." Sophia's face crumpled. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks as she whispered, "They told me you wouldn't mind. That you never wanted anything from the family." It was like watching the final mask fall. For years, I'd lived for moments like this, some recognition, some apology. But standing there in that glittering hall surrounded by gawking guests and the ruins of their perfect facade, I realized something simple and liberating. They never valued me. They never would. The empty chair hadn't been an oversight. It had been a message. I smiled faintly. "You're right," I said. "I don't want anything from the family." I tucked the folder under my arm, straightened my shoulders, and let my voice carry across the silent room. "But I am a professional. And professionals get paid." Then I turned and walked away. Behind me, the sounds of collapse followed gasps, frantic voices, the click of Renee's camera capturing every moment. The scandal had already begun. With every step, something inside me loosened. The guilt, the obligation, the desperate need for approval, all of it fell away like dust shaken off a rug. By the time I reached the doorway, I felt lighter than I had in years. The sunlight hit my face, warm and clean. I didn't look back. Half an hour later, the reception hall looked like a crime scene after the party was over. Empty glasses. Drooping roses. The faint smell of champagne mixed with wilted flowers. Guests shuffled toward the exits, clutching their gift bags like shields. Whispering. Speculating. Recording. At the family table, 3 chairs remained. My mother sat in one, rigid and motionless, staring into the distance. The same woman who once ruled every room she entered, now looked small, a queen without a throne. Some small childish part of me wanted to feel triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow. When you spend your life begging to be seen, being right doesn't taste as sweet as you imagine. That evening, back in my apartment, I kicked off my heels and sank onto my couch, the same second-hand sofa I'd bought when I first moved to Brooklyn. The contrast between my modest space and the luxury of the country club wedding was almost poetic. I picked up my phone. 17 missed calls. Mom, Dad, Sophia, the wedding planner, even Mark. I stared at the list for a long moment, then blocked them one by one. Each block was a full breath of air. The silence that followed felt like peace. In the fridge sat a bottle of Veuve Clicquot, a gift from a grateful client I'd saved for a special occasion. I popped it open and poured a glass. The cork hit the ceiling with a satisfying pop. To professional integrity, I whispered, raising the glass toward the city skyline. The first sip burned, but in the best way. My laptop screen glowed on the coffee table. I opened my banking app, took one last look at the family transactions, then started making calls. First, the florist. Hi Carolyn, it's Ainsley Lopez. About today's wedding, I know what happened. I'm so sorry you were caught in the middle. I'll cover your outstanding balance personally. Then the caterer, the bakery, the string quartet. Each conversation ended the same way. Relief on their end, resolve on mine. By midnight, my credit card carried $14,000 in new charges, and I didn't regret a single one. We always knew we could trust you, Miss Lopez, the florist said before hanging up. That made me smile. Professional integrity matters more than family ties sometimes, I said softly, almost to myself. As I closed my laptop, new email alerts popped up. Subject: Notice of default second mortgage payment. Subject: Lopez family residence foreclosure proceedings. Subject: Columbus Business Journal, prominent local family faces multiple lawsuits. I skimmed them all, emotionless. Then I opened social media. Sophia's relationship status had changed to, "It's complicated." Below it, a new post. "Anyone need a slightly used wedding dress? DM for details." The irony was almost too perfect. Another email came in, this one from the church secretary. "Due to personal circumstances, Mrs. Vivian Lopez has resigned from the parish board." I stared at it for a long moment, then closed the laptop. The weight in my chest lifted just a little more. Before bed, I opened my journal. The same one I'd been writing in since college. I flipped to a clean page and wrote one line. The empty chair wasn't a rejection. It was direction. Then I turned off the lights and sat by the window, watching the city hum below me. For the first time in years, my apartment didn't feel small. It felt like mine. Tomorrow, there would be fallout, anger, guilt, maybe legal threats. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, I had peace. Sometimes, the most powerful seat at the table is the one you walk away from. 2 days later, the news hit the front page of the Columbus Dispatch. Lopez family home enters foreclosure. I sat in my apartment with a mug of coffee going cold beside me, reading every word on the screen. The article detailed everything: the missed payments, the lawsuits, the lavish spending. My family's empire of image had finally collapsed under the weight of its own lies. The phone buzzed with new messages before I even finished reading. From Mrs. Peterson, my mother's bridge partner for 15 years. "Is it true? Are your parents really moving out of the estate? Everyone at the club is talking." Delete. From LinkedIn. Sophia Lopez is now seeking new opportunities in event coordination. That one almost made me laugh out loud. She was trying to enter my field. The same field she used to roll her eyes at whenever I mentioned work. The same one she once called glorified party planning. But now, she was desperate to survive. My phone buzzed again, a bank notification this time. Lopez Family Trust legal proceedings initiated. The trust fund Sophia had drained was officially under investigation. I placed my phone face down on the table, picked up my coffee, and took a slow sip. It had gone cold, bitter. But I didn't flinch. I didn't smile either. I just set the mug back down and rinsed it out in the sink. My movements were quiet, controlled the same way I'd been my entire life. Only now, control wasn't about survival. It was about choice. 3 weeks passed before I saw her again. When I looked up from my laptop that morning, my mother was standing in my office doorway. The woman who used to command rooms now looked small, almost fragile. The designer suits were gone, replaced by department store basics. The perfectly dyed blonde hair showed streaks of gray. She clutched her purse like a lifeline. "We made a terrible mistake," she said softly, her voice stripped of its usual authority. "We need your help." For a second, I just looked at her, really looked. The years of disdain, the sharp words, the way she used my competence like a crutch and called it love. And now here she was, standing before me, humbled. I gestured to the chair across from my desk, the same type of chair she'd denied me at the wedding. "Have a seat," I said. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "I needed your love my entire life," I said quietly. "You chose otherwise." She opened her mouth to respond, but my phone lit up before she could speak. Sophia's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring. When it went to voicemail, I pressed play. Her voice was raw, broken. "The marriage is over. He left when he found out about the money. I didn't know how bad things were. Please call me back." I didn't. That evening, a letter arrived in the mail, thick, formal stationery. My father's handwriting on the envelope. I opened it slowly. 3 pages of apologies, carefully worded, polished, the kind that looked sincere until you read the second half. Then came the real reason. A request. Financial assistance. He detailed their debts, their eviction notice, their difficult transition. The pattern was the same as always: sentiment first, self-interest second. I folded the letter back into the envelope and set it aside. It was time to end the cycle. We met 3 days later at a small cafe 2 blocks from my apartment, neutral ground. I arrived 10 minutes early, ordered black coffee, and chose a corner table facing the door. I needed to see them coming. When they finally appeared, they looked smaller. Both of them. My father's shoulders slumped, his once confident posture replaced by fatigue. Sophia trailed behind, her makeup minimal, her hair pulled into a plain ponytail. Her left hand was bare, no ring. I didn't stand. I didn't hug them. I simply gestured to the 3 chairs across from me, evenly spaced. No hierarchy. "Thank you for coming," I said, my tone professional. My mother was the first to speak. Her fingers twisted the strap of her purse. "We always favored Sophia because..." She hesitated, her voice faltering. "Because she was easier to control." That admission hung between us like smoke. "Your independence threatened us," she continued. "We didn't know how to handle it." My father nodded, his eyes downcast. "We took the path of least resistance. It was wrong." Sophia's voice cracked as she finally spoke. "They told me you owed us because you were the less lovable one." I blinked slowly. The words should have hurt. Once, they would have destroyed me. Now, they only confirmed what I already knew. My father cleared his throat, pulling papers from his worn briefcase. "We need your help getting back on our feet. Just until we sort things out. The bank's given us 30 days to vacate. We thought maybe you could..." I raised my hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "The debt between us isn't measured in dollars," I said. For a moment, confusion crossed their faces. Then realization. "You can't mean..." My mother whispered. "I wish you well," I said, standing. "But we no longer have a relationship." My mother's face broke, truly broke, for the first time in my life. Not the performance she gave for sympathy, but genuine collapse. My father sat in stunned silence, the papers still halfway out of his case. Sophia reached out a trembling hand. "Please, Ainsley." I looked at her fingers, chipped nails, nervous habit picking at the skin around them. The same hands that once held everything I wanted. "The empty chair set me free," I said quietly. "It showed me exactly where I stood, and I'm grateful for that now." I turned and walked out, each step deliberate. Behind me, I heard my mother's muffled sobs, my father's voice calling my name. I didn't look back. Some debts, I realized, can never be repaid, and some chairs stay empty by choice. Outside, the crisp autumn sunlight hit my face. The world smelled like coffee and cold air and freedom. For the first time in 33 years, I was completely, unapologetically free. A year later, I stood on the terrace of a Tuscan villa, fingers brushing the wrought iron railing. Below me, a wedding unfolded, strings playing softly, guests laughing, candles flickering in the Mediterranean dusk. The irony was not lost on me. I was orchestrating another wedding. Only this time, it wasn't for family, it was for myself, for my company, for everything I had built from the ground up. Every detail was perfect, every decision mine. My assistant, Jenna, appeared beside me, tablet in hand. "Everything's running perfectly," she said, then hesitated. "Your mother called the office again, 4th time this month." I took a slow sip of Prosecco, the bubbles dancing against my tongue. "Same answer as always." Jenna nodded and slipped away. I watched her move through the crowd. Confident, capable, a reflection of the kind of woman I used to wish I could be. Now, she was my protégé. My mirror of growth. My laptop chimed on the table behind me, signaling my weekly therapy session. Dr. Freeman's face appeared on the screen, framed by silver glasses and warm eyes. "Magnificent view," she said, smiling. "How are you feeling today?" I turned the camera toward the horizon. "Lighter," I said simply. "I don't regret walking away. I just regret waiting so long." Dr. Freeman nodded, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. "Progress then." "Progress," I echoed. Later that night, I returned to my apartment overlooking the Arno River. The walls were lined not with family photos, but with pictures of my chosen people, my business partner Thomas, laughing at our 5th anniversary dinner. The florist team that stayed loyal, my therapy group during a retreat in Vermont. This was my real family now. My phone buzzed with a message from Robert, a friend who'd become like a brother. Dinner tomorrow with the crew? My treat. I smiled. Wouldn't miss it, I replied. Back in Columbus, things had changed. My mother now worked behind the perfume counter at Macy's, a detail confirmed by mutual acquaintances who still lived there. The same woman who once sneered at those people now had become one of them. Sophia's divorce had finalized 3 months after her husband discovered the truth. She lived in a small studio apartment, not unlike the one she mocked me for renting in college. And my parents, the once proud Lopez's, now rented a modest 2-bedroom in a complex they used to drive past with disdain. Those people should try harder, my mother had said once, when I was 16. Now, she was those people. I didn't feel vengeful. Just balanced. Karma, after all, has impeccable timing. The following afternoon, I sat across from a young woman named Jessica Winters in my office. She clutched her resume tightly, trying to keep her voice steady. I've been freelancing, she said. Small local weddings, a few charity events. My parents think this career is beneath me. They wanted a doctor or a lawyer. But, her voice trembled slightly, I love this. I just don't know if I'll ever make it. I smiled, leaning forward. I know exactly how that feels. Her eyes flicked to the framed photo on the wall behind me, a single empty chair beneath a chandelier. What does that picture mean? She asked softly. I followed her gaze and smiled again. It reminds me that sometimes, not having a seat at someone else's table is the best thing that can happen to you. Because it forces you to build your own. Jessica blinked, absorbing my words. Then she smiled through the nerves. You really believe that? With everything I am, I said. I hired her that day. That evening, I stepped out onto the villa terrace again. The Tuscan sunset stretched across the sky, bleeding orange and pink into the horizon. The air smelled of jasmine and ocean salt. Below, my team moved like clockwork, the florists arranging table runners, the musicians tuning their instruments, Jenna directing final touches. For a moment, I just watched the hum of laughter, the soft rustle of silk gowns, the quiet rhythm of a perfect event coming together. Then I lifted my glass of wine toward the stars. To the empty chair, I murmured. A month later, the Empty Chair Foundation became official. It had started as an idea scribbled in my journal, a way to help students in event planning programs who didn't have financial or emotional support from their families. But now, it was real, funded, structured, and ready to launch. I still remember the first scholarship recipient, a quiet girl from Nebraska named Hannah. She sent me a handwritten letter that began, "Your story helped me find my own strength." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I carried that letter in my planner for weeks, unfolding and rereading it whenever I doubted myself. I wrote back, "Your chair at life's table is always guaranteed." And for the first time, I realized what had once been my wound had become someone else's guide. Not long after, I received an invitation to give a TED Talk in Milan. Professional integrity and personal relationships. The topic made me laugh at first. A younger version of me would have tried to hide behind buzzwords or corporate anecdotes, but now, I knew exactly what to say. When I stepped onto that red circle months later, the lights bright and hot against my face, I looked out at the crowd, business leaders, creatives, students, and spoke the truth I'd learned the hard way. You can't build integrity on top of appeasement, I began. Family, clients, friends, it doesn't matter who. The moment you trade your values for acceptance, you lose both. The room went still. I told them about the wedding. Not the names, not the drama, just the lesson. How an empty chair taught me the difference between being included and being respected. How it taught me that dignity isn't given, it's chosen. When I finished, people stood, applauded. Some even cried. But what struck me most wasn't the applause. It was the peace. I'd said it all and I meant every word. Later that night, back in my hotel suite overlooking the Milan skyline, I poured a glass of wine and opened my email. There was a new message waiting from Dr. Freeman. "You found your voice," she wrote. That's the real closure. She was right. 6 months later, my company, Lopez Events and Design, had expanded into 3 new countries. We specialized in high-end events that carried one clear mission: authenticity over optics. I'd learned the hard way that beauty without integrity was just decoration. Our tagline became, "We design moments that tell the truth." It wasn't just branding. It was philosophy. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, I sat by the Arno again, sketching ideas for a new project. The sunlight danced on the water. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't thinking about what my family might say, or how they might judge me. I was just thinking. Dreaming. My phone buzzed a message from Jenna. Just finalized the deal with the Lisbon venue. Also, the interns are asking if you'll tell the empty chair story at next week's orientation. I smiled. Tell them yes. I typed back. Back in Columbus, the stories about the Lopez family had faded from public gossip to background noise. But sometimes, in quieter moments, I'd wonder if they ever talked about me. If they understood the meaning of that day, then I'd remind myself it didn't matter. The thing about finally standing in your own light is that shadows stop mattering. A year after the TED Talk, I was invited to give a commencement speech at my alma mater. As I stood at the podium, facing hundreds of graduates in their caps and gowns, I remembered being their age, terrified, under pressure, unsure of my place in the world. I spent years trying to earn my seat at someone else's table, I told them. But it turns out, that seat was never meant for me. Sometimes, life's rejection isn't punishment. It's redirection. I saw students nodding, some crying, professors smiling. Then I said something I hadn't planned, something that came straight from the part of me that used to be afraid. When someone removes your chair, build your own table, and make room for others who were left standing. Like it is a querent. Then erase him to a plate. They stood and clapped, and for a second, the sound filled the entire hall. I stepped away from the microphone, heart steady, eyes bright. This was my full circle. That night, I sat in my apartment by the river with a cup of tea instead of champagne. The walls were lined with framed photos of my team, my friends, my students, my foundation recipients. Every face was someone I'd chosen. Someone who'd chosen me back. I realized then I had more family than I ever did before. Months later, an envelope arrived from Columbus. No return address. The handwriting was familiar, neat, deliberate. My father's. I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a short note. We saw your TED Talk. We're proud of you. Mom started counseling. Sophia's teaching art classes at a community center. We hope you're happy. Love, Dad. No requests for money. No hidden agenda. Just words. Simple. Unexpected. I sat there for a long time, staring at the letter. And then, for the first time, in a very long time, I allowed myself to cry. Not out of pain. Not even out of forgiveness. But out of release. Some stories don't need to end in reconciliation. Some just need to end in peace. That evening, I walked along the Ponte Vecchio bridge. The sunset turned the river into liquid gold. Tourists laughed. Cameras clicked. Life went on. I leaned on the railing, feeling the breeze on my face. For years, I'd chased belonging like it was oxygen. Now, I realized belonging wasn't something you found in others. It was something you built within yourself. I smiled to no one in particular. The empty chair had once symbolized everything I'd lost. Now, it represented everything I'd gained. Time has this strange way of softening even the sharpest memories. Some people call it healing. I think of it more like erosion, the way the waves smooth out jagged rocks until all that's left is shape, not pain. A year after that letter arrived, my life had settled into something steady, almost graceful. I had routines now. Morning coffee by the window overlooking the Arno. Meetings with international clients over video calls. Team dinners that felt more like family gatherings than my real family ever did. And every Friday, I lit a candle on my desk, a quiet ritual. Not to mourn, to remember. Because no matter how far you go, some echoes never really fade. It was late spring when Sophia reached out. The email subject line read, "I don't expect a response." My first instinct was to delete it. But something, curiosity, maybe compassion, made me open it instead. She wrote, "I know I have no right to ask for your time. I'm not asking for forgiveness either. I just wanted you to know I finally understand what you were trying to do that day. I thought you were trying to humiliate me, but you were trying to wake me up." She went on to explain how she'd found work managing a small art space in Cleveland. She was renting a one-bedroom apartment, taking the bus to work. She said she'd stopped chasing appearances and started painting again, the thing she'd always loved before our parents turned everything into competition. "I'm not the same person anymore," she wrote. "And I think in a strange way, losing everything saved me." I read the message twice, then I set it aside. No tears. No anger. Just stillness. Maybe people really could change when they had nothing left to hide behind. That summer, Forbes Women published a feature titled, "From Rejection to Reinvention: How Ainsley Lopez Built an Empire of Integrity." I didn't recognize myself in the opening paragraph at first. They described me as a visionary entrepreneur, reshaping the ethics of luxury events. I laughed when I read that line. Me, a visionary. I still saw the woman who once counted 3 chairs at a wedding table and realized she didn't have one. But I also saw someone who had finally learned to choose herself. The interviewer asked what moment had changed everything. I told her the truth. It wasn't the success. It wasn't the company. It was the moment I pressed send on an email I was too scared to write. The moment I stopped being the fixer and started being the boundary. She nodded slowly, her pen scratching across the page. Later, she told me that line made the cover. A few months after the article came out, I was invited to host a mentorship panel in Florence. The theme was women who built their own tables. The irony didn't escape me. I stood backstage, the hum of the audience filtering through the curtains, and thought about how far I'd come from the girl who had once begged for approval to the woman who was now asked to speak about independence. When they called my name, I stepped onto the stage to a warm round of applause. I didn't use notes. I didn't need them. I spoke about how boundaries are not walls, they're architecture. How success isn't about proving others wrong, but about living your truth so fully that their opinions stop mattering. And how every no you receive from others can become the foundation for your own yes. Afterward, people lined up to talk to me, young women mostly. One of them, barely 20, said through tears, "I thought I had to keep my family happy to deserve love. But you made me realize I can build a life without permission." I hugged her, because I knew that version of her, I had been her. When the event ended, I walked alone through Florence's cobblestone streets, the sound of distant church bells echoing through the air. The city glowed golden in the late afternoon light. Everywhere I looked, couples laughing in piazzas, children running past fountains. I saw motion, life, impermanence. I stopped at a cafe and ordered an espresso. The waiter brought it over with a tiny biscotti and a smile. For a moment, I just sat there, listening to the buzz of languages around me. I used to chase peace. Now, I carried it with me. That night, as I unpacked my suitcase back at the apartment, my phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Freeman. "You've come full circle. The only thing left is to live in the after." She was right. There was no more revenge to crave, no validation to win, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd turned pain into purpose. I looked around my apartment, the soft lamp glow, the books stacked by the window, the bouquet of fresh lilies from the market. It wasn't opulent, but it was mine. In late September, I returned to New York for the first time in years. My company had opened a new branch there, and I wanted to see it for myself. The skyline greeted me like an old friend, familiar, unforgiving, and alive. At the office, my team surprised me with a framed quote on the wall. "Sometimes the most powerful seat at the table is the one you walk away from." I laughed. Then I teared up, because that line had been mine once, scribbled in a notebook the night after the wedding. And now, it belonged to all of us. On the flight back to Italy, I sat by the window, watching the city shrink beneath me. There was a time when I would have filled the silence with work emails or strategy notes. Now, I let the quiet stay. I thought about Sophia, about mom and dad, about who they might be now, and for the first time, I didn't feel bitterness, just distance. The kind that doesn't ache, it just exists. Maybe that's what healing really is. Not forgetting, not reconciling, just letting it be part of the story instead of the whole thing. When I landed, Jenna met me at the airport. She grinned as she handed me a clipboard. "Everything's ready for tomorrow's gala. You'll be proud." I glanced through the plans, flawless, thoughtful, efficient. I couldn't help but smile. "You didn't even need me this time," I teased. She shrugged. "You taught me everything." That night, as I walked into my apartment, I noticed the city lights reflecting off the river. For years, I'd thought I wanted success, but what I really wanted was peace, and now I finally had both. I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window, watching the reflection of the empty chair photo on the wall behind me. It no longer looked lonely. It looked like space, an open invitation. And maybe that's what freedom truly is. Not walking away from something, but walking into who you're meant to be. Winter came early to Florence that year. The city glittered under strings of golden lights, the air crisp with wood smoke and espresso. From my apartment balcony, I could see the Arno reflecting the glow like liquid bronze. The night before Christmas Eve, I hosted my company's annual dinner, not in a ballroom or a luxury hotel, but in a restored farmhouse outside the city. I wanted warmth, not spectacle. Long wooden tables, candles in mason jars, rosemary tucked into linen napkins. When my staff arrived, laughing and shaking snow from their coats, I realized something I hadn't before. They were my family now. We toasted to another successful year, to new projects, to late nights that turned into early mornings. And when someone raised their glass to me, to Ainsley, for building something real, I almost couldn't speak, because for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the planner behind the scenes. I felt like I was home. After the party, Jenna stayed behind to help me blow out candles and pack up leftovers. She glanced at me with a teasing smile. "You always host these amazing dinners, but you never take a break. Don't you ever stop to just breathe?" I laughed. I used to think stopping meant failure. Now I think it's the only way to keep going. She leaned against the table, eyes thoughtful. "Can I tell you something? You've kind of become my empty chair story." I turned toward her. Curious. "You built your own table when no one offered you a seat," she said. "That's why I joined your company. Because I wanted to work for someone who understood what that meant." Her words hit deeper than I expected. I reached over and squeezed her hand. Then promise me something, I said. When you see someone else standing, someone being overlooked, make space for them too. Jenna nodded, her eyes shining. Always. Later that night, when everyone had gone, I lingered in the quiet farmhouse. The long tables were bare now, scattered with wax drips and stray sprigs of rosemary. The silence was gentle, not lonely. I sat at one of the tables and opened my journal. The same one that had once held scribbled pain and confessions. Now, its pages were filled with gratitude lists, ideas, and letters I'd never sent. I flipped to a fresh page and wrote, "Freedom isn't walking away, it's staying where your peace lives." Then I closed the book and smiled. A few weeks later, I got an unexpected message from Dr. Freeman. She was retiring, moving to the coast. She wanted to thank me for letting her witness my growth. "I'm proud of you, Ainsley," her email said. "You learned how to stop surviving and start choosing. There was not no seeing what it was never dister. They had for money former. There was nothing for then new seeing." Her words stayed with me all day. That night, I poured myself a glass of Prosecco and sat by the window, thinking about everything she'd helped me uncover: the guilt, the need to fix, the fear of not being enough. All those pieces had once defined me. Now, they were just shadows behind the woman I'd become. In early March, I flew to London for an event I hadn't planned: the International Women's Leadership Gala. I'd been nominated for the Integrity in Business Award. Standing on that stage, dressed in navy silk, the same color as the dress I'd sewn for Sophia's wedding years ago, I felt the past and present overlap in a quiet kind of poetry. When I accepted the award, I didn't talk about profit margins or brand strategy. I talked about respect. "Sometimes," I said, looking out at the crowd, "the world will hand you an empty chair and call it a message that you don't belong. Don't beg for space at that table. Build your own, and let your work become the invitation." The audience rose to their feet. In the front row, a few faces looked familiar: fellow planners, clients, even former colleagues who once doubted me. They clapped until the sound became a rhythm I'll never forget. After the ceremony, a journalist approached me backstage. "Miss Lopez," she said, "what do you say to people who still think success should come from family legacy or privilege?" I smiled. "Legacy isn't what you inherit," I said. "It's what you build when no one hands you anything." She nodded, jotting it down. Another soundbite. Another truth. A few days later, back in Italy, my assistant handed me a thick envelope. Inside was a handwritten invitation to a gallery opening Sophia's art show. The invitation was simple, elegant, addressed only to Ainsley Lopez. No title, no company, just my name. For a long time, I stared at it, wondering if I should go. That night, I called Dr. Freeman. One last session before her retirement. "She invited me," I said. "After everything." "And how do you feel?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to ignore it. But another part." I paused. "Another part wants to see who she's become. Then go," she said gently. "Not for closure. For perspective." The gallery was small, tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop in downtown Cleveland. When I walked in, soft music played, and the scent of paint and fresh blooms filled the air. Sophia stood near the center, talking with a guest. Her hair was shorter now, her posture softer. When she saw me, she froze. Then, slowly, she walked over. "Ainsley," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. "Sophia." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she gestured toward a painting on the far wall. It showed a woman standing by a table with 3 chairs, one empty. Light spilled across her face. "It's called The Fourth Seat," she said quietly. "I painted it after your TED Talk." I looked closer. The woman's expression was calm, not sorrowful. The empty chair wasn't absence, it was balance. "It's beautiful," I said softly. "And I meant it." She smiled faintly. "I wanted you to see it. I know we can't undo the past. But I wanted to thank you for teaching me that love without respect isn't love at all." For a long time, I didn't trust my voice. When I finally spoke, it was simple. "I'm glad you found your peace." We stood there in silence, 2 women who had once been enemies in a war neither of us started. Then I extended my hand, not forgiveness but acknowledgement. She took it. That night, I drove back to my hotel with the windows down, the cool wind tangling my hair. The city lights blurred past, like memories I didn't need to chase anymore. When I reached my room, I opened my journal again. This time, I wrote, "Closure isn't always a conversation. Sometimes it's a moment quiet, complete enough." Then I closed the book and slept deeply, dreamlessly, for the first time in years. Months later, I sat on a panel for Forbes Women Live in Paris. The theme was boundaries as leadership. When a young entrepreneur asked me, "Do you ever regret cutting ties with your family?" I didn't hesitate. "No," I said, "because I didn't cut ties. I just stopped tying myself to pain." The room went quiet. And in that silence, I realized something I'd never said out loud before. I wasn't defined by what I walked away from. I was defined by what I walked toward. Back in Florence, I framed a print of Sophia's painting, The Fourth Seat, and hung it on the wall beside my empty chair photo. 2 stories, 2 women, 1 truth. I poured myself a glass of Prosecco and sat by the window, the city glowing beneath me. I had spent years trying to earn a place at someone else's table. Now, I had my own. And every chair around it, every person was there because they chose to be. That was all I ever wanted. It's funny how life rarely gives you grand endings. No fireworks. No orchestra. Just quiet moments when you look around and realize you've already crossed the line between who you were and who you've become. That's what the next year felt like for me. Quiet revolution. The foundation was thriving. The Empty Chair Scholarship had funded its 10th recipient, a student named Layla from Chicago, who worked 3 jobs to stay in school. When we video called to congratulate her, she cried through half the conversation, saying she couldn't believe anyone believed in her this much. I do, I said. Because someone once told me I didn't belong. And proving them wrong wasn't enough. I had to make sure no one else felt that way again. By spring, we had expanded to mentorship programs. One morning, I arrived at the Florence office early, just as the sunlight spilled through the windows. Jenna was already there, arranging the new foundation posters. She looked up when she heard me. Guess what? Forbes wants to run another feature, this time about the foundation. I laughed. They're going to get tired of us soon. Not a chance, she said, grinning. You're the woman who made integrity fashionable. That line stayed with me all day, not because of pride, but because of irony. For so long, integrity had cost me everything. Now, it was the very thing building my empire. That afternoon, I hosted a meeting with our newest interns, all young, all driven, all at that tender edge between ambition and self-doubt. I stood in front of them, remembering my own, beginning the years of being invisible, overlooked, called too serious, too ambitious, too much. I know what it feels like to work twice as hard just to be taken seriously, I said. But remember, this consistency is louder than validation. People will question you until they can't afford to anymore. One of the interns raised her hand timidly. Did you ever want to give up? I smiled, remembering sleepless nights, tears behind closed doors, and the endless tug of war between loyalty and survival. Every day, I said. But I didn't, because giving up would have meant proving them right. The room went still. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about legacy. Later that week, I received an invitation that took me by surprise. A speaking engagement in New York, hosted by the National Association of Ethical Entrepreneurs. The title of my session made me chuckle when I read it aloud. Turning the empty chair into a brand philosophy. That's when I realized somewhere along the line, the story that once embarrassed me had become the foundation of everything I stood for. The day of the event, I walked onto the stage of a grand Manhattan ballroom, chandeliers glinting, the air buzzing with the kind of quiet power you can only feel in rooms full of decision makers. When I began my talk, I didn't start with business strategies or leadership frameworks. I started with a memory. The first time I realized what power looked like, I said, it wasn't sitting at a boardroom table or standing on a stage like this. It was the day I saw 3 chairs at a family wedding table and knew mine was missing. A ripple moved through the audience. Faces softened. Pens stopped scribbling. Sometimes, I continued, you learn what you deserve by what you're denied. And sometimes the chair they take away becomes the one you build an empire on. When I finished, the applause was thunderous, not the polite kind, but the kind that comes from people who get it. After the session, several CEOs and founders approached me, asking about collaboration, mentorship, partnership, but one woman stood out. She was older, silver-haired, dressed in a simple black suit. I'm on the board of the Women's Leadership Network, she said. We'd like to offer your foundation a grant. No conditions, no red tape. Just support. Has. Which placed Paz. Remember them time to matter. I thanked her, holding back the emotion that threatened to rise in my throat. Because that's the thing about recognition, it always comes long after you stop needing it. Back in Florence, I gathered my team to share the news. When I told them about the grant, Jenna screamed, the interns clapped, and I just laughed until tears rolled down my cheeks. Do you know what this means? Jenna said. It means we can double our scholarships next year. No, I said, still smiling. It means we've officially proven that kindness can scale. In late June, I received a postcard from Ohio. The handwriting was instantly recognizable, Sophia's. It read, our parents sold the house. They're moving to a retirement community. Mom says she's proud of you, even if she doesn't know how to say it out loud. I'm teaching painting full-time now. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. Thank you for letting me grow up, finally. There was a small sketch on the back, a table with 4 chairs, sunlight streaming through a window, no signature. but I didn't need one. I slipped the postcard into my journal and smiled. Some apologies don't need words. That summer, the foundation launched its first official empty chair fellowship, a year-long mentorship for women rebuilding their lives after professional or personal betrayal. We partnered with therapists, life coaches, and business mentors. When I stood on stage to announce it, I looked out at the crowd and saw rows of women, some young, some middle-aged, all with that same flicker of exhaustion and hope in their eyes. This isn't charity, I told them. It's continuity. Every woman here has built something from nothing. This is just your next table. The applause that followed wasn't loud, it was powerful, like the sound of 1,000 doors quietly opening. One evening, after everyone had left the office, I found myself sitting alone by the window. Outside, Florence glowed under the streetlights. The city hummed, alive. On my desk sat a small wooden box. Inside, I kept mementos, things that marked the journey. The cork from the bottle I opened the night I walked away. The first check written to the foundation. A printed photo from that TED Talk. My hand mid-gesture. The caption reading, "Integrity over approval." And, tucked at the very bottom, a folded piece of paper I hadn't opened in years, the original event contract from Sophia's wedding. I held it for a moment, then smiled. No anger. No bitterness, just gratitude. I'd spent years fearing that story defined me. Now, I knew it had refined me. That night, I took the old contract to the terrace. The air was cool, the stars clear. I struck a match and watched the edges of the paper curl and blacken, the smoke drifting upward into the night. When it was gone, I whispered into the quiet, "Thank you for the lesson." Then I went back inside, poured a glass of Prosecco, and toasted the only person who'd never left me, myself. Weeks later, I received another letter, this one from a young woman in Argentina. She'd watched my Milan talk online and written, "I was raised in a family that never believed in me. Your story made me believe I can start again." I printed it out and pinned it to my wall, right beside a note that read, "Your worth doesn't need witnesses." By autumn, the Empty Chair Foundation had become a movement, not just about scholarships or business ethics but about reclaiming narrative. We received hundreds of stories from around the world. Women leaving toxic family businesses, breaking generational silence, starting over at 50, saying no for the first time, each one a quiet rebellion. And every time I read one, I saw a piece of myself, not the woman who'd been excluded, but the one who had chosen to stand anyway. That November, I walked into our Florence office and saw Jenna arranging a new installation on the wall. Dozens of small wooden chairs, painted by scholarship recipients from different countries, each one unique colors, textures, designs. "What's this?" I asked, smiling. "It's our legacy wall," she said. "Each chair represents someone who refused to disappear." I stepped closer, tracing my fingers over the painted surfaces. One chair had a quote written on its back. She was told she didn't belong. So, she built a world that did. My throat tightened. This was it, the full circle. The empty chair had multiplied. And in that multiplication, I had found meaning. By the second anniversary of the Empty Chair Foundation, I had given dozens of talks in cities I once only dreamed of visiting. Paris, Tokyo, Sydney, Buenos Aires. But none of them felt as emotional as the one that was coming next. The invitation arrived in a white envelope sealed with crimson wax. It was from my alma mater, the same university I'd attended on student loans, while Sophia got her fully furnished apartment and paid tuition. They were hosting their centennial celebration. The letter said, "We would be honored if you would return as our keynote speaker." The irony wasn't lost on me. Years ago, I'd walked across that stage in a thrift store gown, terrified about the debt waiting for me after graduation. I'd been invisible back then, another hardworking student no one noticed. Now, I was being invited back as the example of what resilience looked like. The night before the speech, I stood in my Florence apartment, rehearsing in front of the mirror. But every time I started, my throat caught. Not because I was nervous, but because I knew this wasn't just a speech, it was a reckoning. I sat down and wrote 3 words at the top of my notepad: truth, boundaries, legacy. That's what my entire life had become. The next morning, the university auditorium was packed, banners hung from the rafters, and I could see faces. I recognized professors who doubted me, classmates who'd forgotten my name, students sitting where I once had, notebooks open, eyes wide. When the dean introduced me, her voice rang through the hall. "An alumna who turned personal exclusion into global empowerment, please welcome Miss Ainsley Lopez." Applause. Cameras. Spotlight. I took a breath, stepped forward, and began. "I used to think success was about being invited," I said. "To a job, a meeting, a family table. I thought belonging meant approval. But it doesn't." The hall went quiet. It took me 30 years to understand that belonging isn't given. It's built, and the people who once shut the door on you? They don't define your story. They just make sure you write it yourself. It is not late in mass unis to why way. It is not down this active this so 450 faux pretension. A soft ripple of murmurs filled the air, the kind that happens when truth lands heavy. I told them about the empty chair, not as a symbol of pain, but as one of transformation. I described the wedding, the silence, the decision to walk away, and the empire that rose from that moment. Then I looked straight at the students in the front row, the ones with tired eyes and quiet determination. You are not hard to love because you demand respect, I said. You are not ungrateful because you refuse to be small. And if someone tells you that you don't belong at their table, don't shrink. Build your own and invite others who've been left standing. It is not redder. Directive lu same tansfall. The room erupted into applause, the kind that vibrates through your bones. For a moment, I just stood there, letting it wash over me. Afterward, as I stepped off stage, the dean took my hand. I hope you know, she said, you've given more than a speech. You've given a generation permission. I smiled softly. That's all I ever wanted. Outside, the sun was setting over the campus lawns. Students stopped me for photos, hugs, questions, and among them was a young woman with dark curls and nervous eyes. Miss Lopez, she said, voice trembling. I'm paying my own way through school. My parents think it's a waste. But your story, it makes me believe I can make it. I handed her one of my foundation cards. You already have, I said. You just don't know it yet, I said. Back in my hotel room that evening, I opened the window to let in the cool air. The sound of laughter from the campus below floated up through the night, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something that went beyond peace, a deep, quiet joy, the kind that comes from purpose fulfilled. I took out my phone and texted Jenna. Speech went well. Remind me to set up a scholarship here next semester. Her reply came seconds later. Of course, you'll never stop, will you? No, I typed back. Because this isn't about me anymore. That summer, the Empty Chair Foundation celebrated its 100th scholarship. We hosted a gala in Florence, nothing extravagant, just elegant, warm, honest. Instead of celebrities and donors, we invited every scholarship recipient we'd ever supported. They came from all over the world: Brazil, Kenya, Japan, Italy, the US. Women who had once written to me out of desperation now stood tall in their own success. As I walked through the crowd, I caught snippets of their conversations, talk of new projects, new businesses, new lives, and suddenly, I understood. This wasn't just a foundation. It was a lineage. When it was time for my speech, I didn't use the stage. I stood right in the center of the room, surrounded by them. I used to think legacy was about what you leave behind, I said. But legacy isn't about what stays after you're gone. It's what multiplies while you're still here. I lifted my glass. To every woman who's ever been told she's too much. To every person who's been silenced, sidelined, or underestimated. Your chair was never missing. It was waiting. The room filled with applause, soft at first, then rising until it shook the chandeliers above us. After the event, I slipped outside onto the terrace. The night was cool, the stars bright over the Tuscan hills. I stood there alone for a long time, just breathing. Footsteps sounded behind me. It was Sophia. She had flown in quietly, without making a scene. Her hair was shorter now, streaked with gray, her expression open and calm. That was beautiful, she said. Thank you, I replied. I'm still painting, she said after a pause. But now I also teach art therapy. I tell my students that healing isn't about forgetting, it's about repurposing the pain. I smiled. Sounds like you learned faster than I did. She laughed softly. You taught me, even when you didn't mean to. We stood side by side, silent for a moment, watching the lights of Florence shimmer below. Do you ever miss them? She asked quietly. Sometimes, I said honestly. But not the version of them that existed. I miss the version I hoped for. Sophia nodded slowly, then reached into her purse and handed me a small wrapped package. Inside was a delicate ceramic figurine, a tiny table with 4 chairs. I made it, she said. For your office. I looked at it for a long time, then set it gently on the terrace railing where the moonlight touched it. It's perfect, I said. Thank you. After medable wild face fair. And the medable wild face there's the cause. Later that night, when I got home, I placed the figurine beside the framed photo of the original empty chair. 2 symbols, side by side, one of exclusion, one of creation. For the first time, I realized they belonged together, because one couldn't exist without the other. Months passed. And the world kept turning. The foundation grew. My company expanded to New York and Singapore. And yet, the moments that stayed with me weren't the headlines or the interviews. They were quiet things: handwritten thank you notes, students' success photos, stories of courage whispered in backstage hallways after my speeches. Those were the things that mattered, the proof that my pain had found purpose. That December, as I decorated my apartment for the holidays. I caught my reflection in the window, not the tired planner from years ago, but a woman finally at peace with her own reflection. I poured a glass of Prosecco and sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker across the Arno. The ceramic figurine sat on my desk, the moonlight glinting off its white glaze. And I thought maybe that's what healing really is. Not a grand apology, not reconciliation, not even triumph. Just the quiet recognition that you survived something meant to break you, and used it to build something better. The morning of the 3rd anniversary of the Empty Chair Foundation, Florence was soaked in sunlight. The Arno shimmered like glass, the bridges glittering with the movement of early commuters and tourists holding cameras over the railings. I woke before dawn and walked barefoot to the balcony. A habit I'd kept from my first apartment days, a way to greet the quiet before the world started asking for pieces of me. The city stretched below, breathing. Somewhere, a church bell tolled 6 times. It was the sound of a new chapter. Later that afternoon, my team surprised me with a celebration at the office. Nothing extravagant, just flowers, champagne, and a cake with white frosting that said, "To the woman who built the table." I laughed when I saw it. "You know, I never meant for this to become a metaphor for everything." Jenna grinned. "That's what happens when metaphors change lives." We toasted to 3 years, to 140 scholarships, to countless lives changed, and when the crowd started chanting for a speech, I raised my glass and said the only thing that mattered. To everyone who believed me before I believed in myself. And to those who didn't, thank you, too, because without your doubt, I might never have found my faith. The room erupted in cheers. But beneath the laughter, I felt something quieter: contentment. That evening, I stayed behind after everyone left. The office was dim now, lit only by the soft golden lamp on my desk. I walked along the wall of miniature chairs, our foundation's legacy wall. Each one was painted by a woman who had taken her own first step toward freedom. Some were bright red, bold and loud. Others pale and delicate, their edges lined with gold leaf. And in the center, there was a new addition, one that hadn't been there that morning. It was painted in shades of soft blue and champagne ivory, the same colors as Sophia's wedding palette. A small card beneath it read, "For my sister, thank you for teaching me that standing alone isn't lonely, it's brave. Sophia." I stood there for a long time, the words blurring as my eyes filled with tears I hadn't expected. She'd found her way too. We both had, just separately. And maybe that was okay. 2 months later, I found myself back in the US. Again, this time for a very different reason. The Forbes Women Impact Summit had invited me to deliver the closing keynote. Redefining power. Compassion as currency. Standing backstage, microphone in hand, I felt calm. Not because I was used to it now, but because this time, I didn't need to prove anything. When they called my name, the applause was loud, immediate. I stepped onto the stage and began. "I used to think power looked like control," I said. "Like being the loudest voice, or the one who always has the final word. But now I know real power is the ability to stay kind in a world that mistook your silence for weakness." Cesar. And well, gone away. I told them the truth about my story, how compassion and boundaries had coexisted to build everything I had, how forgiveness wasn't surrender, and how every version of me that had broken was still here, stitched together, stronger for the cracks. Then I paused, scanning the audience. "If you leave here remembering one thing," I said, "remember this. The empty chair wasn't a loss. It was an invitation to rise, to build, to begin." When the applause came, I didn't bow. I just smiled, hands steady at my sides, heart full. That night, I returned to my hotel overlooking Central Park. I ordered room service, ignored my emails, and sat by the window watching the city lights blur into 1,000 tiny constellations. The reflection in the glass wasn't of the woman who once begged for belonging, it was of the woman who had created it. The world outside shimmered, a sea of possibility. When I got back to Florence a week later, I visited the villa where my journey had truly begun. The one where I'd stood years ago, overlooking a wedding that wasn't mine. The air still carried the scent of lavender and sun-warmed stone. In the courtyard, a group of young planners from my foundation's mentorship program were setting up for an event. I watched them from the balcony, unseen, as they debated flower arrangements and lighting cues, laughing over coffee. They reminded me of myself years ago before the world taught me to second guess. Now they were building, creating, standing tall. One of them, Layla, our Chicago scholarship recipient, looked up and spotted me. "Miss Lopez," she called, waving. "Come see what we did with the tables." I walked down the steps, smiling. There were 8 tables arranged in a circle, each with 4 chairs, but at the very center stood one empty chair, draped in silk and roses. "It's for you," Lila said proudly. "We wanted to honor where it all started." "What is a plastic day?" I touched the chair's backrest gently, tracing the smooth wood. It gleamed under the afternoon light. "You have no idea," I whispered. how much this means. That night, after the event, I sat alone on the terrace. The candles flickered, and the air buzzed softly with the sounds of summer insects. In the distance, the Arno shimmered silver under the moonlight. I opened my journal for the last time and wrote. The chair was never about exclusion. It was about direction. The pain was never punishment. It was propulsion. And every time I thought I was standing alone, I was actually standing at the beginning of something beautiful. For setting prod, I closed the book, exhaled, and leaned back in my chair. For years, I'd lived chasing closure, approval, peace. But now, I understood. Peace isn't a finish line. It's a home you build inside yourself, one decision at a time. A soft breeze swept across the terrace, rustling the pages of my notebook. I looked out over the water, the same water I'd once stared into on nights when I questioned if I'd done the right thing by walking away. Now, there was no question left to ask. I lifted my glass one final time. To the empty chair, I whispered. To every person who's ever felt unseen, to every story that starts with loss and ends in light. When it wanted shaped, the city lights flickered back at me, as if nodding in agreement. Somewhere, in the distance, bells rang steady, serene, unhurried. And as I sat there barefoot, peaceful, whole, I realized something simple, something quiet, something true. I hadn't just built a table. I'd built a life.